Okay, hello. Welcome to Viridian Artists. I'm Erne, the director of this gallery that actually is entering its, I think, 55th year. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but not much. What you are now witnessing and a part of is our 32nd Director's Choice exhibit. And at Viridian, we do a special sort of juried show in that we do a regular juried show where we invite a curator from a museum or some outstanding arts organization to jury it. They pick their 30 artists, and then I go through all of the submissions and pick my 30 artists. And we call that Director's Choice, and that's what all of you are a part of. Today we have 9 artists who will be talking about their work, and we're going to start off with Dushanko Dobek.
Hi, I'm Dushanko Dobek, and this piece behind me is a very small version of collateral damage. And collateral damage is one of about 5 series that are ongoing, and they relate to specific global issues. One is social justice, trafficking of women and children. The other is climate. And that climate, politicians, and corruption affect very seriously the lives of millions of women and children around the world. In 1982, I read Prisoners Without Names in Cells Without Numbers by Jacobo Timmerman. And it talked about how all these writers and artists and people who were independent were being tortured and jailed and killed by the regime. I did a piece called Silent Voices, because that's what was happening. And Jacobo Timmerman was the equivalent of the New York Times editor in this country. So this was outrageous. And when I did that, it led me to start looking at other issues. And most of the issues focused on power. This piece, if Silent Voices was the first, it also was the great-grandfather, grandmother of everything I've done over the past 40 years. So this is basically the great-grandchild of collateral damage. It followed from Silent Voices, Perilous Journeys, Parallel Migrations, No Olvidado, and Promises, Promises, which did with trafficking of women and children, particularly women, and now Collateral Damage, which deals with the incarceration of children in border camps around the world, but specifically where we are. And in the news, which, by the way, the main source for the initial impetus for most of these works is the New York Times. Now, there were no iPhones, etc. when I started these series. So I would read these and then look at what were the core concepts that I wanted to get across, and then how could I do it without ever showing a body. And so for Promises, Promises, people, women around the country sent me petticoats and slips and bridal dresses and quinceanera dresses for me to seriously distress, to mirror the promises made to women that they were going to be models, they were going to be married, and instead they were trafficked. In this case, Collateral Damage, they had a lot of photographs of where these children were along the border. And most of the spaces had concrete floors. And needless to say, they didn't have much in the way of bedding. So they gave them Mylar blankets that you hand out after a marathon. And so one of the first half dozen pieces were large spaces covered with Mylar blankets, many of which, and most of the work is collaborative. People bring in the blankets from the marathon, they bring in their wedding dresses, and for this piece, pre-pandemic, people brought in any toys, pieces of clothing or attire, or books of their children. and this 30 by approximately 45-foot room, dark but with motion sensor lights. The floor is completely covered with the scrunched mylar. And approximately every 4 or 5 feet, there was an article of clothing, a sneaker, a toy, a booklet, a broken frisbee. And as people walked through, these were artifacts supposedly left behind by children had been moved out to another place or died while in detention. So what happens, and if you look at the card I gave you, I also collected some from beaches, things that came up. So the artifacts were there, people walked through, they knew from the card what it was about. What are we doing to children, as well as adults? And of course it's happening globally. As I took it down, I realized that those objects people had donated were artifacts. But what happens to them when they move the children on? And if you save them, they then become evidence. So this version of collateral damage is evidence. Now, if they can't keep track of the people, then obviously, do you think that the things that they kept really, truly were inventoried correctly? So I started wrapping up, as I deconstructed this big installation, wrapping up the different objects. I photographed them first so that they all have a number, no barcode, but number. And so the artifacts, the things that people donated, and on your card, you see the floor. And appropriately, this is number 1 of hundreds. And so collateral damage here in due course will be hundreds of these, which either they can be taken off here and put in the line or cover walls. And they are really reflective of everything I do. I've done pieces in Berlin, Tempelhof airports, I do them in forests, at galleries. And if you want to pass this around, any questions? I think I went 6.5 minutes. You did it perfectly, thank you.
I'm Elaine Erne, I'm from Philadelphia. I'm working on a series called The Lives and Traumas of Stuffed Animals. It's mostly large drawings and lithography and some etching and woodblock. The animals or stuffed animals in this series represent people who have to deal with things throughout their lives and can't get out of it. They just try to always be happy about it. So mostly it started out a reflection of my childhood, but then it kind of expanded to just people in general. So the drawings are all done with graphite. There's just layers and layers of pencil. Harry Carry Bears is a smaller drawing. A lot of them are like 10 feet by 12 feet. And no bear or any stuffed animals are hurt when I'm doing them. People keep giving me stuffed animals, so I have a lot of stuffed animals. So I just think of stuffed animals, how to show them in some kind of situation they can't get out of, but they still just keep smiling at you. I think they have eyes, but people keep telling me they don't have eyes, so I guess that's just something I won't agree with. And I guess questions, I'm better at answering questions, concerns, or fears.
Do they all commit hara-kiri?
No, some of them are stabbed, some of them are hung, some of them have been run over, some of them are being dragged by a giant clown down the street by nooses, that kind of general thing. I guess drowning actually is one that happens a lot, but this was the only hara-kiri, and I didn't know what a samurai sword looked like, and I was very surprised at how many samurai swords are available online for sale at reasonable prices. So, But I usually just, I just think of the drawing and I do a lot of sketches because I need to get the lighting right. So I'll fill up a sketchbook of lighting coming from different directions in order to figure out the shadow and the highlights. And then I'll move on to the big paper. Because once I get to a certain point on the big paper, I can't go back. And there have been drawings where I've gotten like halfway through and realized I just did everything wrong and had to start again. So a drawing like this probably took about a year. Some of them have taken me up to 3 years, but those have been like ones that are like mural size. And yes, I go through a lot of pencils. I have killed many trees, and so I use just regular pencils, starting from like 3H up to like 9B. And I don't use graphite or anything. I just like do layers and layers, so there's no smudging. So, and then the lithography is just on stones and etching a wood block. So yeah, I don't know when this series will end. At some point, I guess no more stuffed animals will pop into my head. But for now, I find that it's cheaper than therapy, so I'm just doing it.
Hi, my name is Xan Peters. I'm originally from Clearwater, Florida. Currently living outside of Poughkeepsie, New York. So this piece in particular is called Paper Airplane. It's an oil painting of a Carolina parakeet specimen from a museum. I've long been interested in natural history, where that intersects with fine art, particularly this need for reproduction, an approximation of nature to study it, and this distance created as you get so close to something, as you get closer and closer to studying it, there's still some sort of irreducible separation between the person studying it and the subject and the specimen. There is something that you miss about a bird from it being alive, from it moving. That's, to me, what is so startling about bird specimens, is they lack that rapid movement that we have with birds. A living bird, you're only allowed so close. A dead bird, you can get as close as you want, but you miss that experience. And I find that interesting to look at all sorts of species like that, in birds especially. In this case, this is a species of parrot that was actually native to North America. We had it in the southeast, particularly where I'm from in Florida. And they went extinct in the early 20th century due to habitat loss, among other things. So to me, there is this separation of time, even though there's a connection of geography. There's this. I still love going to bookstores and finding old bird guidebooks, leafing through to see if I can find one that is made pre-1940s, and there it is in the text, like it's still alive, like it's still here with us. I've even got a box set of vinyl records of recordings of bird calls, and you can go through it. You'll find ivory-billed woodpeckers, you'll find Bachman's warbler, all kinds of now deceased birds that are on the vinyl, you know, as sort of it now feels like this relic of another time, but in the time it was made, it's just another aspect of birding. I draw a lot from Dutch Baroque art history, which I'm very into for the lighting effects, but also its own that form as kind of an ancestor of modern museum exhibits. This just, among some other, this is part of a series of bird specimens in particular, but I am, again, that torpedo shape that you find bird specimens in museums, there's just something about it that you also just want to pick it up. It's like a little paper airplane. I kind of couldn't escape that gesture, and I found someone to pose and let me model their hand and put in that Carolina parakeet. But that's what this piece, where that came from. I can take questions as well if anyone has any. Or I can be done talking.
Well, I'm so glad you explained why you called it a paper airplane.
No worries.
I have a question about the framing because it seems very deliberate. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So the I was a framer for a bit, so I wish I could say that there's a little bit more to it. I found that it was a drop from another job, and I thought it matched it quite well. But I am really a big fan of, maybe it's because as a framer you have to frame a lot of things. Thin black frame, big white mat, that's what everybody wants when you come in. To me it was very exciting, like smaller painting, this very big frame, it felt museological, it felt like it gave a smaller piece gravity, and that's something I do like as a framer and as an artist. I like bringing gravity to smaller pieces because it is, even little things, I like drawing tension into it off of the wall. And of course just the detail of the light line on it just felt very draftsman to me. I was so attracted to that. But thank you.
Bird specimens that you encounter, stuffed birds, are they typically sort of, when you talk about a torpedo shape, are they typically like very much like in repose, like very still, as opposed to, like a taxidermy that would be a bird in motion? And I think, that kind of, for me, that kind of relates back to your thought about when you have the stuffed bird in front of you, it's not moving, that you don't have that movement.
Yeah, I've encountered plenty of museum specimens, stuff for display, but also the things that get stored in drawers typically. Typically, for the sake of space, most birds are kind of preserved and kept in that torpedo shape. I also am very fascinated with taxidermy of extinct animals. There's like one animal that I've returned to a lot called a Tasmanian tiger, or a thylacine from Australia, and I am always astounded by like how awful the taxidermy is on this poor creature that's no longer alive, and it just sort of feels like one final indignity that the taxidermy is bad on pretty much all of them. But there's a lot of ways I like drawing from with how the animals are preserved, whether it's something like for display, something more lifelike. Imitating life, that reproductive element that is interesting to me. Sometimes the more utilitarian is it unintentionally surreal, which is what attracts me. Because I've used plenty of more lifelike taxidermied specimens to paint from, but I think the unintended consequences of keeping them like this, the more utilitarian shape. It's just interesting how it served one purpose and becomes something else, something very bizarre.
Are you familiar with the Wagner Free Institute of Science in Philadelphia?
I've actually never been to Philadelphia.
It's a 19th century natural history museum where they haven't changed anything. So
yeah.
it's a good study of bad taxidermy.
I do love places
And
like
they
that.
have drawers full of birds.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you. I'm gonna have to look at it. Thank you. Is that? Thank you so much.
So my name is Sharon Draghi. I'm from Harrison, New York in Westchester. So this piece is called The Beginning of Claustrophobia, and it's part of this body of work that I am doing, or been working on since COVID, called Nested. And basically, COVID came and my whole it's a photograph, by the way, my whole photographic process changed. Because we were isolated, we couldn't get out, I couldn't photograph other people, I had other projects going on that involved photographing being out in the world, and all of a sudden you're like in your house. Especially the first year or two, when there wasn't any vaccine, and it was really kind of terrifying, and I felt this need to create and get all these feelings out. And so I started doing these self-portraits. And at first they were rooted in the present day, and then they started to go back to very time not specific. And I was looking at a lot of paintings, a lot of Sargent and Hopper, a lot of portraiture. This Danish artist Willem Hammershøi, quiet domestic scenes. And I started making these works, these body of self-portraits that were largely conceptual, and that I would start with an idea about loneliness or isolation, memory, being seen disappearing. It was also about me getting older and feeling like I was kind of disappearing from from you as happens to women when they get older. So I had all of these things going on, and I made a lot of work, self-portraits, which I do by myself on a tripod with a timer. This one, actually, to say, is a little different in that it's not as conceptual. The idea, I mean, I usually start with an idea about a feeling I have and then turn that into an image. This was actually a memory, which is why it's called The Beginning of Claustrophobia, which kind of came to me. And it happened when I was I would say about 6 years old, and I was playing in my friend's house down the block, and we were in her basement, and her basement was incredibly creepy because it was kind of like dark wood paneled. You know, all these like really weird, scary clown velvet pictures hanging like in that basement, like really freaked me out. But anyway, we were down there playing, and then like her mother said something like, "Sorry, girls, we have to leave." And I went up to leave, but I think I forgot something, so I went back down to the basement. They didn't realize, and they left. And I was stuck down in their friggin' basement with these creepy clowns. And I'm 6, and I was absolutely petrified. And I remember, like, there was the garage door there. They were basically went to the garage, like pounding on the garage door, and someone heard me and was able to open it. But I am like claustrophobic, and I know that it stems from this incident. I mean, I walked up the flight because when I can avoid taking an elevator, I will. But anyway, so that was, I thought, wow, it would be very kind of cool to recreate, that moment. So I went on eBay, I found a creepy clown picture, which was incredibly fun because there are a lot of them on eBay, but this one was really close to what I remember. It's on velvet and everything, and I made this photograph.
Great.
Do you shoot with film or digital?
Digital. With the self-portraiture, I do digital because it's, I can't see what I'm doing. I'll do a couple of different takes, so it's easier to work in digital. Any other questions?
Thank you. These stories.
I'm Turshen, and I'm part of a group of artists. I've been a part of Viridian for a long time. I had my first solo show here in 2008, and I've had several since then, and I've also been an affiliate. This work comes out of collective 5 artists now. At the time we started 2 and then 3, and it was really during the pandemic, something that several artists have referred to. We just felt very isolated, very cut off from one another. It seemed really important to keep together, to keep communicating. We started with The Exquisite Corpse. So we started circulating those, and actually we exhibited a dozen of them here on one of the holiday shows, I think. And then after that, we started working on top of each other's work. This series comes out of work that we did for illustrating a book which was to be called Beyond Consent. A little complicated theory there about how people appear to give consent, but when you look a little bit further, it doesn't look like they have. And so the lockdown started in 2020, and then in 2021, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that was really the precipitating event for this particular collage. And Yvonne and I share a lot of political opinions. I started working on something of the Ukrainian flag in yellow and blue, and then Yvonne had the idea of adding the extraordinary stories we were reading about Ukrainian women resisting the war. They were building Molotov cocktails, they were building nets for camouflage, they were also enlisting, and they were doing a lot of other things. And we thought that there must be some way of representing the extraordinary courage of these women. So this is called Ukrainian Women Resist, and they're throwing Molotov cocktails. The collaborative work has progressed tremendously. The current series that we're working on is something sponsored by the United Nations of competition for who can illustrate justice, theories of what the world might look like if it were more a just place. And so we're collaborating on that. I have to tell you, it's just a lot of fun. You just never know what people are going to come up with. And collage is something you start doing when you're a kid, and it's just so easy to collect those things. I inherited a big bunch of National Geographics from the 1970s. It's a wonderful source of material. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has. Thank you.
Witkowski
Witkowski, yes, thank you.
with his,
Moonlight.
okay, is it a painting or a photograph?
It's a painting, it's a pastel.
Incredible.
Well, it's actually, as you call it, a printing of the pastel. So it's, but I exclusively work with pastels. I went to Pratt Institute back in the 70s. Unfortunately, it was at a time when conceptual art was really very big, so there were just a lot of black canvases and stuff. So I didn't really get a lot out of going Pratt. And then what ended up happening was I continued to paint. I worked in a frame shop, as I heard someone else talk about. And it was a gallery, we sold reproduction art. And so I started to paint, and then life happened. You know, so you obviously, work becomes a little bit more important. You have a house to take care of, and a family to take care of. So I put everything away, put the pastels away. And, you know, again, I love telling the story because my friend Steve Beal here is also an artist and a musician. We play guitars on Sunday afternoon, and I was talking with somebody, and I said, hey, you know, I went to Pratt Institute, and like Steve kind of backed up, and he was like, I went to Pratt Institute. He says, so we were kind of, oh, you went to Pratt Institute.
Raise your hand if you went to Pratt.
Oh, the other one is back. So like, it was kind of interesting. We started talking about painting, and I go, yeah, I used to paint. And he like looked at me and goes, you used to paint? He says, you either paint or you don't paint. You know, like, so he says, and the next time I saw him, he gave me 3 2-inch canvases and a brush, and he says, here, start small. You know, and I've been painting ever since, and that was about, I guess around 10 years ago maybe or something. So it's, but I was just also saying that this is really my first time I've shown, other than just like local, you know, coffee houses and things like that, where I have my work. So it's kind of nice too. I've been using that cafe call for entry, and it's, you know, kind of exposed me to whole different type of thing, you know. So, but that's my story. So,
Questions? Okay, where is that place?
it's in Manasquan, New Jersey. You know, it's in the Jersey Shore that I work from. You know. So, but thank you. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. So I sold the original. The original's 24 by 30, so it's a pretty big painting, you know. So, you know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking to ask you, like the size of the originals.
Yeah, the size of the original was 24 by 30, but you know, it's kind of hard to find a place to hang that. So, you know, but that's it. I do pastels. Pastels by Ken. All right, thank you.
I'm Matt Cohen, I made this, and appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about this. This is part of a series of wire mesh and screening plexiglass etched into and painted, and also some joint compound on here, as well as acrylic paint. I've been doing this running theme of 2 different kinds of time that I've been working with for many years. Has been in the past mostly about juxtaposing left to right parts of the canvas. And what I mean by juxtaposing time, the rectangle in work, as some other artists have used, is a kind of classicism that is outside of time, and the gestural markings, as you'll see, as you can see beneath these screens, and continues on this side, is a moment in time. And so I see it as a transient development on the canvas. This one it happens to be on wood panel. The darker areas are inspired by some Baroque painters, and especially in the layering of different colors. Some of the screening here, or the hardware cloth is painted in such a way as to evoke a kind of deeper shadow and deeper recession in the painting. So I do consider these paintings that are, there's a lot of assemblage, just using different materials than paint, although paint as well. Let's see, is there anything else I want to say about this?
I'm curious, why you chose those materials?
Well, originally, it was out of desperation. I was after art school. I was pretty poor, and so I found things that I was able to assemble and to work on, and then it developed from there as I got on my feet and was able to afford it. I combined painting with all these materials. So, for instance, this kind of thing in those days would have been found in the field in Vermont for fencing.
There's a certain roughness to it, is that deliberate?
Yeah, I do have some in this series that are a little more refined in this, but there is a roughness to it that certainly is brought on by the use of hardware and screening. The wire, the 28 gauge wire that I use to connect everything, that is not placed so much, except that I sometimes want to use it as a horizontal rather than a diagonal. But it takes on a life of its own, the wire itself.
Question?
Yeah.
You mentioned the right half was inspired by kind of Baroque classicism.
Yeah.
What about the left half?
Left half is more instinctive. The gestural quality is something that I probably lean more to, but so it's sort of like two halves of my thinking, really. The classicism of the timeless and the momentary development of art making, like gestures. One of the earlier paintings were just oil paintings, was a series of the Castle of the Woods, is what I called it. And it was just a rectangle in a certain form. And on the other side would be a gesture of woods, of trees, and that kind of thing. So.
And is a temporal aspect, you've talked about it a little bit,
Yeah.
classicism on the one hand, something more modern on the left. Is there anything else that evokes the sense of time that I might be able to see with your assistance?
Yeah, the sense of time, the other thing I should mention is that I do like to use desaturated colors, but particularly in that kind of sense of classicism that I see it as. Classicism is playing down color landscape. But if it answers your question, I think sometimes the exposure of some more vibrant colors like that up there or down here might bring about a kind of a moment in time.
I really like the layers. It's wonderful, especially when you get close and see all the layers. The plexi are those found, or did you?
No, these are.
Intentionally bought?
Yeah, unlike years ago, I now buy these things. And So I cut them and according to how I need them. And so a lot of it is etched in and some of it is painted on. So it's sort of it plays with both of them depending on what I need. Thanks for the questions.
No more.